Hi, everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I'm tempted to start this one out with some really bad singing, something along the lines of Flash. Oh, but I will resist, except I just did. Glad to be talking on this episode for a second time with comics creator Jim Keefe. Jim, thank you for jumping in.
Hey, thanks for reaching out to me. Greatly appreciated.
My pleasure. We are talking about that character that I was just referencing who's currently in a dynamic pose over your shoulder, and that is the character of Flash Gordon, a comic strip that you worked on for a good amount of drawing and time.
Yeah,
And
just
so
under 8 years.
yes, yeah, quite a tenure. So I am curious how you first became acquainted with this character.
Well, um, very much so via the Joe Kubert School, which I attended back in the 80s. You had like I was a novice in regards to so much of comic history there because I'm in my early 20s. I knew Marvel comics. I knew names. Stan Lee was really good at getting names out there of their artists. Jazzy John Romita, Jack the King Kirby.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I was familiar with those artists, and of course, there's DC artists I was aware of as well, but the history of comics, not so much. And so you had this mix at the Kubert School of not only the instructors who were drawing from their influences, but fellow students who were way more on top of what was going on in the industry at the time than I was.
Hmm.
I had friends, my friends, Mark McMurray, Brian Bilter, they would just tune me into anything. Like they would be like, "Oh, you like this? Oh, then you'll love that." Like, that kind of stuff where it's like introduced me to like Mark Schultz and
Oh yeah, yeah.
actually introduced me to Al Williamson because generally it's like, hey, here's where your interests lie. You would love this kind of stuff.
Cool.
And what's interesting as far as Flash Gordon is concerned, you had the artists of Joe Kubert's generation. They had they grew up like when they were like 10 years old. There was like three pillars of adventure strips, and I'm going to refer to notes so I don't get them wrong. Hal
Certainly, certainly.
Foster doing Prince Valiant, Milton Caniff doing Terry and the Pirates, and Alex Raymond doing Flash Gordon.
Hmm.
And those were the big three as far as newspaper comic strips. And I have to show you real quick,
Yes.
like here is the size of a comic strip back in the 30s. This is from the first year of Flash Gordon.
Nice.
So you would have huge pages like this in the Sunday paper every week with incredible some of the best illustrators around.
Hmm.
I also have just real quick to give you just a quick visual, like a Hal Foster page, which you can see
Nice.
just the huge size of it, Prince Valiant.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
it was it was just the golden age in every sense of the word. You had, once again, best illustrators doing some of their top work,
Hmm.
and it was in a medium that was affordable to everyone. Like
Yeah.
anyone could see it because the like Joe Kubert's generation, it was this immigrant generation coming into New York. So it's not like they had a ton of money to spend. It's
Hmm.
not like uh, they were just throwing money around. So comic strips in the newspaper were a great source of entertainment. And I think about it too, and I'm sure you're the same way, where at 10 years old, like that's where all this stuff really imprints on you as far as your
Hmm.
favorite comic strips, as far as your favorite superheroes, as far as your
Hmm.
favorite sports team, as far as like all that stuff really hits hard when you're about 10, 12 years old. So for Joe Kubert's generation, it was those comic strips that they, and once again then they were able to bring all of that wealth of those illustrators to the classroom when I was at the Kubert School. So Flash Gordon was huge just because it was one of those iconic illustrators, Alex Raymond.
And then you, of course, got to work on the strip, and so I'm curious about what your experience going through that process was like.
Well, it was funny because once again, I'm going to show you real quick. Like this is Flash Gordon by Alex Raymond, first year of the strip, the
Hmm.
topper, which is because it's such a huge page, the artist would also do a top strip. So this was Jungle Jim by Alex Raymond, followed by the main part of the strip is Flash Gordon, of course. And Jungle Jim was like an Indiana Jones kind of, strip where jungle adventure, this, that, and the other thing. So I want to flip this around.
Yeah.
And here's when I was doing the strip. And this is actually huge still because it's back in the like early 2000s. But you can see like my strip is relegated to this really small space where I
Hmm.
only have a few panels. And here's Prince Valiant on the top, which is
Hmm.
given a larger space. But you have like here we have one, two, three, four, five, six, 5 to 6, strips per page. So when I was doing it, it was a very different beast.
Hmm.
Alex Raymond could have like 12 panels, and he would later, make bigger panels when it was more of when it was a quarterly size. But I was relegated to make a visual impact to maybe if I did 6 panels, you're talking about a postage stamp as far as a drawing.
Yes. Hmm.
So you're relegated to just a few panels per week because I would usually the one I just showed you had like 4 panels just so
Hmm.
I could have like the big shot of the monster attacking the rocket ship. And
Oh, there he went.
Splash just made a jump for it.
He
He's
did.
scared. He wants to get away.
He heard that there was a monster attacking a rocket ship, so he
He's off to fight adventures.
that was perfect. Perfect timing.
Oh my God. There's no stopping him. He will
That's
save
right.
every one of us.
He
Um,
really will.
so I'm going to leave that be.
Okay.
So um so I'm to the point where I'm just going to have like 4 panels, which is just a whole different beast as far as the comic strip goes. And that's only once a week. So the storytelling gets really laborious because it's so slow paced,
Hmm.
especially if it's just a Sunday page. Um, so that was different. So it was kind of like the best of times, the worst of times working on that strip.
Hmm.
And the best of times being create like writing and drawing your own strip, comic book, graphic novel, I think is the best case scenario because you really just have a passion for the material because you're also writing it. There's incredible collaborations going on out there. So I'm not knocking that,
Hmm.
but I'm really interested in the writer and artist scenario.
Yeah.
So when I did the Flash Gordon strip, I was writing it, drawing it, doing the lettering, doing the coloring. So it was very much my vision from start to end, how I thought it should be.
Hmm.
So that was fantastic. Plus, I'm looking for reference at some of the best illustrators in the world. I'm looking at Alex Raymond, I'm looking at Al Williamson, I'm looking at Dan Barry, like just these iconic illustrators, best in the business as far as my inspiration. And so it just like raised the bar as far as what the strip should be.
Yeah.
So that was unique, to be able to do it all myself and also on this iconic character.
Hmm.
The worst of times being the size restriction,
Hmm.
and also you had, to put it bluntly, it just didn't pay well.
Yeah.
Gag strips are the most popular in the newspaper. So they have the highest distribution.
Hmm.
Adventure strips and continuity strips are generally don't have the circulation that a gag strip does,
Huh.
and your pay is reflective of how many papers you're in. So a strip like Flash Gordon, by the time I was taking it over, by the time I took it over, it was only in a handful of papers. And
Hmm.
even though I was picking up papers, I got the Daily News in New York and it was selling internationally, but I was on food stamps. like
Wow.
working on Flash Gordon.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I eventually I had to not re-sign because
Yeah.
I had to find work that paid better, just simply enough. So it was creatively, it was incredible, but monetarily, not so much.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as the mechanics of it, you're getting something that's about postage size print, but what size were you working in on those images?
Oh, literally, you for a comic strip like that, um, yeah, I'll send you the size of an original,
Hmm.
just so you can get an idea. But generally, it's like the paper size itself is only like 17 inches across.
Hmm.
So 15 inches maybe as far as the whole strip. Um, and you don't want to draw much bigger because it gets reduced so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's interesting. Like I think Patrick McDonnell, who does the strip Mutts,
Hmm. Hmm.
fantastic strip. He pretty much tries to work real small to replicate this, like what you're seeing is more the size he's working in. Granted, it's reduced so small now, but he's working a smaller size where you have, I think, Ray Billingsley, who does Curtis,
Hmm. Hmm.
still draws huge, as far as much bigger than like a 14 by 70 17-inch piece of Bristol. I used to work on staff at King, so I would see all the originals coming in.
Yeah. Yeah.
You had artists like John Cullen Murphy working on Prince Valiant, huge originals, Ray Billingsley, huge originals. And then other artists, because of the constraints, would work smaller, like myself, because they didn't want the line work to fall out,
Hmm. Hmm.
which just, yeah, it's not fun that way. And it's interesting. I was able to talk to John Romita, and yes, I will mention my favorite artist, John Romita.
Absolutely.
Um, him working on the Amazing Spider-Man strip from like 77 to 80, he complained about that big time as far as just the size constraints. He hated the postage stamp size, and he was yearning to get back to comic books where you had some room to draw.
Hmm.
And he also, it was funny, he would complain, and I use complain in quotation, but as far as the writing, as far as Stan Lee writing the strip, he would kind of rib Stan Lee because it was like, if Stan Lee, if he could, he would have had like photographs in that strip. He wanted so much detail. So it's like in this little postage stamp, you'd have a car chase, or, of course, Spider-Man swinging through New York City with all this iconic architecture. Like there wasn't the room to do it, yet John Romita pulled it off, which
Yeah.
to this day, I don't know how he did it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing stuff. And I mean, you look at the details in a panel and the time that it must take is just incredible.
And that's eventually that's why Romita had to drop the strip, because
Mm.
he was art director at Marvel while doing that.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
he was working 8 days out of a 7-day week.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was just an insane schedule to get that amount of work done. And that's why he eventually had to stop.
Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
I know it kind of reached a threshold as far as how many papers it was in. And that was kind of one of the things that governed him too, as far as continuing. But the strips he did are like that's
Hmm.
my sweet spot because I'm like 10, 12 years old when that came out.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, my next question may be actually the gestation of a third talk at some point, and that's about some of the sort of the history of comics and how that has informed your work.
That,
It's a big one, right? It's a big
yeah,
question.
the history of it, it very much, and you see it with, it pretty much keeps like a fire in your belly as far as being able to do the work, to see these
Hmm.
great masters as far as the history of comics. It would be interesting to do a deep dive at a later point, but generally, if you look at any artist's studio, and they have like a wall of books somewhere
Mm-hmm.
where it's just where they can kind of tap into to see some of their favorite stuff. You have Joe Kubert, who, like I said, grew up on Hal Foster and Alex Raymond, Milton Caniff. And I actually saw one of his last lectures at C2E2 in Chicago. And he's one of the talking points he had was talking about sequential art and him growing up reading Hal Foster. Before Prince Valiant, Hal Foster worked on the Tarzan strip. That's where he kind of got his street cred. Like he did phenomenal work, and King was like, we want him, we're going to hire him, he can create his own strip because of the phenomenal work he's doing. But to hear Joe Kubert talk about Hal Foster's Prince Valiant, Hal Foster's Tarzan,
Mm-hmm.
and how it's like he would talk about it like between panels, just how he illustrated sequential the narrative. You would get a sense of the ape swinging through the trees. Like it wasn't static images, it was moving images. You saw it in your mind because of how it was laid out, and that's a sign of a good comic artist. But hearing Joe talk about it, he's all of a sudden 12 years old. You can hear his excitement in his voice. Same way me talking about, my favorite artists, where it just like hits home. And I think as far as how it informs your work,
Mm-hmm.
I think you're trying to recapture that. I think
Mm-hmm.
you're really trying to just get that spark of inspiration from it that then can translate to the best part is when it translates to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Because like my Flash Gordon stuff, after I decided to step down from doing it, instead of getting another artist to do it initially, they reprinted my stuff for a number of years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And also even right now there's a comic series in India where they're just reprinting all my work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so much fun to hear from people from just all over the world where they'll reach out to you and go, oh my gosh, I remember reading this werewolf sequence when I was like 10 years old. That is so cool. That is, and you kind of like, oh, that is what I'm shooting for. Like someone to
Uh-huh.
read that and get that kind of sense of adventure from my strip. Um, so as far as that, how does it inform your work? It is that sense of just like almost like a childhood kind of like joy of just adventure, or romance, or whatever the genre is that the right word, genre would be, because you see it with young adult graphic novels today.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter Tessa, she's in her 20s, she works in book publishing, but she grew up with all the young adult graphic novels and manga,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that's just a sweet spot for her. That's like her, I'm just gonna, that's how she can recharge, by just kind of like enjoying that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that taps into the final question that I have for you, final official question, and that is, Flash Gordon is now in the process of being released in a new run from Mad Cave, and just thinking about where comics are now, I was wondering what you're envisioning as the future of the medium.
Well,
Another
and as far
large
as
question.
yeah, and as far as the future of the medium, and before I even jump to that, I'm going to do a throw out to the new Flash Gordon strip, which was just launched by King Features just recently. They have the Mad Cave, which is going to be doing comic books.
Mm-hmm.
The comic strip was just relaunched. I'm gonna mangle his name. I think it's Dan Shoddy who's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I know his name, I just don't know how to pronounce it. So my apologies to him if I got it wrong, and whatever, respect. But he is just, I think he's just perfect for the strip right now. He has this style which just works. It's um backtrack. Back when Alex Raymond did it, it was really huge. So he could put in a little, all this like fine line detail, which would actually reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
Dan has a great style, which is more minimalistic, but superb, not minimalistic, simple, superb as far as the coloring and line work, which just translates to a comic strip for today.
Mm-hmm.
And he is writing and drawing it, my sweet spot as well. And he knows how to pace a strip because he comes from it visually and also being the writer. And it's just fast paced. And the last thing you can do with a daily strip, which only comes, a few panels every day, is have some just exposition where it
Mm-hmm.
just deadens the strip. You got to put in that kind of stuff with the story so it's not hammering you over the head. It's just flowing. He's doing it superbly. So as far as um what I'd like to see next, I think that was the question as far as storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're already seeing it in young adult graphic novels and manga,
Yeah.
like the long form stuff. The Marvel and DC kind of have uh the hold on just superhero stuff
Yeah.
in general. They have like their, intellectual properties, which they have, a strong hold of, which it's, and, but outside of that, with young adult graphic novels and other publishers, you just have these long form stories that can be told in different formats, which writers and artists just are able to have some breathing room.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so like I'm really excited in that regards, because you do see, I mean, it's just the nature of the business. It's like newspaper strips hit like a point where their readership started going down. There's comic books, there's TV, there's movies, there's stuff that's, kind of like taking a piece of the pie.
Mm-hmm.
And like with comic books too, like comic books were huge in the 40s and 50s. Then they kind of hit a lull and then revamped in the 60s. And I think right now you are just seeing like they're kind of reaching kind of a plateau right now as far as Marvel and DC, their circulation with an older readership.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but young adult graphic novels and manga are just taking off and are so like there's so many more different genres. There's romance, there's action, there's all, it's not just limited to superhero stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also appealing to just not generally a male audience.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
it because of the different genres, there's just, it opens it up to just all different kinds of storytelling, which appeals to a larger readership. So I already think we're kind of seeing the future of where it's headed
Mm-hmm.
in that regards, because you kind of look at the business model of where it's taking off, and
Yeah.
that's where it's taking off currently. So that's where I see it, and that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as a school teacher, as somebody that appreciates what comics can do, I'm also excited about that direction. And Jim, with that, I thank you for your time. Thank you for another wonderful talk. Lots of insights packed in, and glad to have you back anytime to talk comics and history and
Oh,
all the things.
yeah, and I'll keep you posted as far as if Flash survived his latest adventure.
Well, I'm sure he
As
did.
far
I'm
as he
sure he
took
did.
it, well, it's up for grabs.
Yep,
It's a
yeah.
cliffhanger.
Dun dun. Yep, absolutely. Well, looking forward to hearing about Flash's status and looking forward to talking again sometime in the future.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.